All right, hello and welcome everybody to StatGPT. Actually, scratch that, StatGDP. Here with your host, Fool Me Twice, and we have our other host here. Where's my couch? How you doing? Where's my couch?
Hey, fool me twice. Doing all right over here. Just still looking for my couch, and it doesn't look very promising, but eventually might just have to go to IKEA.
Oh, really? You don't want your own like self created couch that you have this memory of? It's very sentimental. Why don't you just like find it somewhere? Like,
That's true. I've dumpster dived for a couple couches before, and the raccoons got to them before I did. So, uh, I mean, I'm all right having a couple pet raccoons in the house, but I guess it's not great with that.
yeah,
No
it's
one
not.
knows who he is.
Yeah, one of those people out there. Who
Yeah,
knows?
some some dude.
Yeah, might as well be, because
Yeah.
you might as well change your gender or something, and like, if you don't like your current gender, because what's going on with our souls these days? We're getting crushed, I guess, at work. The work is all soul crushing, right, guys? Everyone knows that's what work is. If you define work as working for a corporation where you join in on their interests and do not what you believe in doing, but what they believe in doing, then you're going to find out that it sounds like a much better deal at first up front and when you first get onboarded than later on how you're feeling months or maybe years down the road, obviously, because you end up working much, much harder. You end up having to work very hard socially and physically, mentally, potentially, to integrate into the team, integrate into the corporation and its culture, and deal with the niceties of pretending to go along and get along and love everyone, quote unquote, to suck up to everyone, kind of, and do the impossible, basically, right? Which is play all these different relationships and responsibilities and goals that are theoretical in its structure for how the company sets itself up, but also entirely real world and just psychological in terms of narrating all these social barriers of how much high up in the hierarchy people think they are relative to their abilities and their actual knowledge, and whether anyone actually means any of it or whether it's actually worth working that extra, going the extra yard and increasing your competencies like maybe threefold or fivefold within the company, and then maybe at the end of the year they're dangling this raise that's not 3 or 5x, obviously, and maybe it's on the level of 3 to 5%, 10% tops, if you're really good and lucky perhaps, but usually not so much. So I'm just describing the whole nature of soul crushing work currently, and sometimes you got to do it for a while, but it can also seem like this kind of alienated labor going back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We've all known about this for a couple hundred years, but it still rears its ugly head, I guess, in the modern era. So, and it is where we are and where we stand. Are we not?
I believe you're correct in terms of all the soul crushing aspects of working, and I believe, well, just kind of zooming out one more level in terms of looking at it from a more corporate point of view, and then I guess I'll get more detail from there. But basically, I don't think the system was designed for individual satisfaction or happiness, but I mean, but they'll try. I mean, corporations will try their best to convince you that that's what it's all about. The teamwork, working hard, and like feeling good about the job and all that stuff. It's for them to assure throughput, right? And it's for them to basically appease shareholders who also don't care about teamwork and all that crap, right? It's just, but they need to convince you that you care, so that you will get the physical work done, which is this cold, emotionless, relentless machine kind of thing. But it's a machine that's trying to convince you that it is somehow human, somehow organic, that you should be part of it and feel like you can bring all your human aspects into this cold, mechanical system. And I guess what I think it's the battle between that surface level conditioning and what truly organically are like people's deeper level inclinations, is what like ends up triggering that soul crushing effect, right? It's like people not realizing that they are getting crushed. They think they want it because they're convinced about, the niceties of, what is teamwork and being good in the office and getting along with your coworkers, right? It's like, but that all really just makes the throughput at the end of the day a little bit better, right? And
Right.
and it and that's all it is. It's just a mechanism for a company to use to make sure that the employees they've hired actually apply themselves, right? If everyone came in feeling really good about themselves already, they're not going to try harder to get better, to do better work, to try to beat the person next to them, right? So it's just this competitive. It's this battle between competitiveness and trying to be friends, right?
Right.
And companies don't care about that. HR doesn't care about that, right? They only care when crap hits the fan due to all of this contrast, right? This emotional
Right.
contrast, and which still is a corporate thing. It's all just a hoax at the end of the day.
Right. It's only the
Well,
earnings
but
statements,
right,
meaning that crap is hitting the
exactly.
fan. It's not that the company culture feels bad for the individuals
No,
working in it. It's like more
no,
like take
no.
it or leave it. Like it can be a very bad situation, but you're just expected to just kind of suck it up, either make it better, be like a savior or something, and make all the workplace culture get better, or it's just take that or leave it. Right.
Exactly, exactly. You take it or leave it. It's like, oh, if you quit, like, you're gonna have all these, I don't know, legal limitations, like put on you, right? And I mean, I kind of know about that, but it's just, it's hard to maintain. I guess what it comes down to is maintaining personal happiness, like, balancing your emotions. It's very difficult to do that when most people have already convinced themselves to like logistically lock themselves out of it unknowingly, right? It's just they've already fed into the whole workplace environment thing instead of just applying themselves individually to get the job done and realizing that possibly the people around them will appreciate them and respect them simply based off of them doing a good job. And then them doing a good job might make people around them want to also do a good job. But it's not that anymore. It's, well, how hard, like, how well can I make it look like I'm doing a really good job without doing a good job? Because that's somehow actually winning for most people in the office, which also makes it soul crushing for people like you and me who like to do good organic work, right? So we're up against like the other 90% who basically know the system's playing them and are playing it back, right? And is that right or wrong? I don't really know, but it's the majority,
It's
right?
this
So
very
yeah,
powerful social force, socioeconomic force tugging at
right,
all of us to engage with
right,
the corruption. And we have to engage with it somewhat because relatability has a huge factor in sociability. And
right,
you have to be able to relate to people enough to not be consistently judging everything that they're doing as negative. You have to have like at least slightly more positive in the interaction than negative, or else you have been felt as someone who has broken the rapport with people, and you'll be off-putting, and you'll be off-putting to the culture, even if you're trying to save, or I mean, maybe not be some kind of savior figure, but just add positivity or bring the culture back in line with something slightly more organic. Like if you're pushing the lever in that direction, everyone's going to be exposed for whatever corruptions they have if you're trying to root out
right,
your own corruption. So you will
right,
immediately feel judged because everyone is judgmental, right? I'm judgmental, and by me being judgmental, everyone else judges that I am being judgmental because they realize that if they internalize my empathic connection that they would also judge themselves, and so people can sometimes feel outed and judged, I guess, if you hold them to a higher standard than they are currently holding
right,
themselves to, which I'm not saying I even hold people to high standards. I can only hold myself to whatever standard I hold myself to, and
right,
anything that I hold to anyone else would have to be someone who's subordinate to me, right? So it wouldn't be possible unless I was in the managerial state of getting someone else who's my subordinate to submit to me. But that comes with the respect of a commanding authority and power, and it's like people don't have that in the corporate workplace because we all have these physical boundaries where you're not allowed to physically abuse people or force them, physically. You can't throw someone up a ladder or something, if they're scared to go up or something. They have to like just do it. You can't actually like physically force or harm people, obviously, because we absolutely want everything to be all hunky-dory and everyone to be, holding hands, singing kumbaya, as if we have this really wonderful corporate culture and all these HR departments and labor unions and laws that protect our workers. So we make our workers strong, we're stronger together, and together we're going to have this like la la land where everything's all perfect somehow, and conflicts are resolved by just ignoring them, kind of, or maybe hoping that they never boil over. But at its heart, I feel like, unfortunately, violence is the law of nature. And unfortunately, you may not want to say this, but even though the other quote that we hear of is violence is never the answer, technically, at the end of the day, violence is always the answer to anything in nature, technically, as far as who's going to force anyone else to submit or do what, where, because we're all, at the end of the day, we're all just worried about losing our source of income and losing our stability and losing our connection to what we consider a stable, survivable world where we have the shelter and the food and, clothing and utilities that we need to actually survive. And being deprived of that is considered an act of violence. If you're thrown out of your house or whatever, thrown out of your place, that is violence. So everything that we do is a response to the maintained authority over the controlled use of violence that could be inflicted upon us. And so violence is always the answer. And so unfortunately, I'm going to bring up this infamous figure who wrote a manifesto, and I'm going to say maybe not the name, but the Unabomber rings a bell. This guy who is considered a terrorist for sending some bombs and some things that exploded in the mail and things, but he recognized this phenomenon and called it oversocialization, which is maybe sounding like a contradictory term, because as we've gotten over-socialized in his sentiment, we're actually kind of getting less organically social, but we're over-socializing in the sense that there are too many connections between dependencies in the industrialized society, meaning obviously we depend upon thousands, if not tens of thousands of people for our basic goods, and we don't know how to make any of them, except maybe one really specific type that we work on, perhaps, or a couple, but many people don't even know how to build anything these days, so it's like most of us are reliant on so many other systems that we don't know how to put it all together ourselves as individuals, and so we feel very lost, and this whole feeling of inferiority, quote unquote, comes into play, where we have to like make it up somehow by feeling superior in some other way. So it's this over socialization, or maybe you could call it over specialization, that is the irony of the great industrial age, and now approaching what we hope is called, or many want to call, the post-industrial age, although I think that's kind of a hoax. I think we always need industry, and we're kind of thinking too highly of ourselves if we don't think we need industry anymore. Kind of reeks of kind of post-humanist tendencies of we don't need industry because we're going to graduate away from being human. But anyway, I'll leave it with that. I'm sure you have some thoughts about that idea.
I was just, I was kind of going to wrap it around and just basically say that most people use inorganic mechanisms like social media to dictate their organic social interactions. And that's kind of where the problem lies, right? It's like, well, the inability to separate the two. It's like, can't you just walk out in the street and rely on your own intuition to decide whether or not the stranger you're talking to is worth talking to, isn't dangerous, this and that? What happened to that ability, right? No, it's like, oh, apparently we need social media to filter and vet all these personalities so that we
profiles
get all these profiles and whatnot, these character traits and behavioral traits and whatnot, to make sure that every person you run into is close to what you think you are. Right? And it's like a weird echo chamber because a lot of people don't know who they even are. And so further than that, they're like relying on these inorganic systems to further mess up who they think they are, right? So it's just and that also plays into, I guess, the original topic of the workplace and it being soul crushing. It's because there's just too much, I guess, interference or what's the right term? I guess like what do you call it when
Yeah,
the two notes are really
dissonance.
close to each other? Just there's too much distortion. No, what is it?
Dissonance.
Dissonance. Sorry, dissonance. Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't find that word. It's too much dissonance emotionally. Like you have to balance all these levels while you're in the workplace in order to like keep calm, try to be yourself, wonder whether or not you can be yourself, do your job or don't do your job, like get along with the people next to you, or get along with your boss and like smile, this, that, like all these things that basically clash with one another. Like you're never, humans weren't organically like supposed to be exhibiting all those emotions at the same time. Like it's
Right.
basically wearing us down, right? Which is soul
Right.
crushing, right? It's like kind of something I realized for myself. It's like, all right, so it was soul crushing for me because I realized that I'm not as into this whole playing the system thing as most people are. I'm kind of like you. I'm like, I like organic work. I like feeling good about what I'm doing. I like helping people. I like them seeing that I'm doing a good job. Not that I need to be like patted on the back or anything like that, but it's good to know that other people know that I put in good, organic, positive energy into the system or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah, so because of that, I realized that I either have to play along or absolutely suffer wondering why people around me won't realize what I realized. But the thing is, they've realized what we've realized. They just chose the other side, right?
Right.
And that's all it is, right? Call it weakness, call it cowardly. I don't know. Like to me, obviously, it seems cowardly. It's like why can't you be strong enough to just be yourself and be proud of that and just stand for yourself and who you are and just act, the way you are at all times. But apparently, it's not the case, right? Again, I think it's cowardly, but that's probably a harsh term to apply to it. But life's too short to not be yourself, and the fact that most people aren't being themselves is soul crushing.
Right.
And you know that they've chosen to not be themselves, right? For this cold cash thing, this mechanical system, right? It's a little saddening, which is why I just kind of left, man. Um, Going to a new place would have just been same crap, different location.
Right. At some point, you see the commonalities in all
Yeah.
workplaces and all social dynamics that are governed by this
Right.
intertwined body of governmental and state and relations of corporations and the modern structure of our laws and
Right.
all kind of departmental dependencies and the concerns over the HR departments and the litigation factors and all the levels of leverage that different people think and exercise the authority to have within their agencies that oversee the operations of any corporation. It's so intertwined that at some point you realize the commonalities between different jobs and different workplaces, even in different industries, to where you know that maybe there's a comparably less bad situation somewhere else, but not for so long, only for a little bit, maybe, as you get back to that same honeymoon period again, where you have a few months where things seem like they're going pretty well, and then eventually it becomes this very competitive environment where, yes, on some level, genuine competition is good and brings out the best in us, but ends up being this kind of hidden variable type vibe where it doesn't seem like everyone is sharing all of our information, in a way that is organic enough to feel like we have a genuine team bond or connection that would hopefully you would think have existed back in the day, but now is so corporate cutthroat style that everyone kind of is just pushing to get their raise faster than anyone else because they want to prioritize, themselves, the individual, getting him or her, your own raise before anyone else does, because you know that there's so much going on and there's so much stuff happening that you need to like push forward to like be the priority, to be the one who's reviewed the fastest for your raises. You have to
Right.
push to be the one who advances faster than anyone else, meaning you're trying to keep other people down, but you can't say that. You can't even try to give off the vibe that you are holding other people down or trying to keep people at bay to stop them from gaining the knowledge and experience and to apply themselves as much as they could, and you know they can, but instead perhaps it's like you try to pretend that it's all one big happy family and one team, while at the same time what you really are doing is trying to keep everyone else as down as possible while doing exactly what you're saying or implying before, which is trying to advantage yourself as much as possible for putting in the least input as possible while pretending or making it seem like you're putting in the most amount of input. And that's the relativity and strangeness of it all, right? If you hold the rest of humanity down, then you don't have to advance very much at all. All you have to do is like exist and maintain your current level of competency in order to seem very important. But the harder task is to challenge others and yourself to help others advance while putting the burden on yourself to continue to advance at the level that you would have wanted yourself to advance always and everyone else equally, so that you get better over time and everyone else does. That's the harder part. That's the challenge, is to rise, to raise all ships up along with yourself. So that's a
very
challenge.
Selfless mindset.
It's a very selfless mindset, and we don't have that mindset in general in our workplaces, and that's like a very rare kind of characteristic, in my opinion. It's doable, but it takes too much humility and too much, I guess, hard work. I guess most of us are just too lazy to want to advance and continue to challenge ourselves that much, because the struggle is a struggle, obviously, and the struggle is what leads to the success, because as they say, no pain, no gain, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you brought up the whole one rising ship raises all ships, or whatever. Like a rising tide raises all ships, right? So,
yeah.
But then the thing is, I'm just imagining, the rising tide, and I guess we're in a situation where we're in a rising tide, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, a rising tide! Let's get away from that. Like that looks dangerous." Like they just like go away from it just to stay at the same level at all times because they're afraid of some kind of change. They're afraid of actually having to confront real work, right? And so another part of looking good and not actually being good in the office, and I realized this, and it's kind of, I don't know, like it's a little self-deprecating, but I had to like realize it for myself, is that, I think I'm a pretty nice person. You're a nice person too, right? Like, I'm not saying like, oh, we have to like, be really giving and all that in order to be nice. No, it's just, be cordial, be friendly, have
try to raise the mood, at least keep it as good as it is, and don't add negativity to situations where there's a lot of negativity in the world in general. But yeah, like you're saying.
So yeah, exactly. No, I agree with that. And then what happens, what I realized though, is that a lot of people will look at that and be like, oh, this is a guy who takes his job seriously and tries to be nice. And this is a person who has already decided that they're going to pretend as much as they can to get along in order to do as little work as possible. So keep that in mind, right? So it's like you're being nice to this person, and they're thinking, oh, if I don't be nice to this person, but if I'm not nice to them back, they might complain about me. Right. And therefore, I will try to be as believably, organically nice in return. And I've realized that I've been fooled many times. Right. It's like, oh, they're taking me out to lunch, or like they're like asking if I want to go join their barbecue or something. Right. And it's like, oh, no, it's not that. They really just wanted something out of me at the workplace, or they're just trying to double check that I don't have anything on them. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't pick up on the fact that they didn't come to work like for a week or something, and they're kind of just bribing me after the fact, like, hey, like, you're gonna feel bad, throwing me under the bus because that you're eating at my barbecue right now, that kind of thing, right? So, I mean, I get it, and I've always kind of semi-realized that in the moment, but it didn't really hit me until it all kind of stacked up, right? It's like, wait, what am I really doing? Right? Like,
there's also
Yeah. Anyway,
those kinds of interactions where maybe you have an invitation in the moment, but they don't really want you to take the invitation, but they're kind of just trying to make it seem like they're being nice, but they really don't want you to accept it, and are just kind of wanting to seem like they're on your side or something, and like they got
Right.
you, you got them. Like it's
Right.
the cordial vibe, and I get that, but it's also a fake vibe because they're not actually being real. They're just trying to hint that they're on your side when they're not fully, because nobody's fully on your side besides yourself, technically. So, I don't know. I guess I'm getting into some pretty dire sounding social interaction type concepts right
Well,
now, but it kind
not
of
really.
applies.
That's what it is, though.
Right.
But it should be dire, is what we're getting at. Not for us, but for what we believe in general in terms of the society, right? It's like, well, maybe it's going to go along fine. Maybe we're just you and I are just being crazy, like judging this system that's been working and been working the way it has been for all this time, and we're just the fools for not going along with it or convincing ourselves to go along with it. But man, I'm
Right.
telling you, I tried for 10 years to be like, okay, fine, I'll go along with it. Like,
Right.
fine, I'm gonna go in, smile, say hi, talk about their kid for like in like 5 minutes, and then just do my work and get out and get paid, right? And like I was okay with that for 10 years. Somehow I'm not okay with that anymore.
That's the crazy thing, right? Because that's
Yeah.
the formula, and this is why I'm calling that the system is not working, because you just look
Right.
at happiness levels reported, and then how people act, and then how people act up with their projections of their own psyche, and you can see that the state of humanity is not that good in the industrialized world right now, mentality-wise, I would say. And you just look at what you were saying, the formula is you just work for 40 years and then you're good, right? You know, it's just 40 years of your life, which is possibly the majority of it. You know, hopefully, if you want to live long, it's not quite the majority of it, but basically the majority of it, half of it. And it's like, you know, you just work for 40 years and then you get your retirement, you know. How
That's a hoax.
easy is that? And you're saying that it's a hoax. And so that's what I'm also saying, is that
Yep.
retirement is basically a hoax, because anytime you stop doing something, you know, you don't use it and you lose it. So clearly, once you stop mentally and physically exerting yourself, you're going to get less healthy and you're going to die off sooner than later, as opposed to staying sharp, staying fit. Obviously, work involves some combination of mental and physical aptitude, fortitude, and practice. And if you go out of practice with something, you're going to just get worse and worse over time at whatever it is you want to do in life. So, yeah, I think that people realize it once they do retire, and I'm nowhere near that, but it seems like most people need something to do. They need to feel worthy and exerting themselves in some activity that serves some real purpose. So I guess maybe it's the case that once people retire, they find out who they really are, or maybe we're just describing the fact that this whole workplace thing is kind of a hoax, and working is dependent on what you're trying to achieve. And that's why I'm saying that the system's not really working, because nobody really knows what they're trying to achieve anymore, other than pushing the next penny and dollar and $10,000 or whatever of paychecks and stuff and salary, and they're getting their wage basically, and we're all chasing this overly monetized source of money, income-based corporate society, where it's all about however much greedier we can get together, like as individuals and as our managers and everyone on the higher up chain, supposedly in this hierarchical place of the world that is financial. And as we try to monetize more things, the world gets more fake. So in that sense, retirement's a hoax, because you're always retired from whatever you're not currently doing, I guess, and you might as well just gain as many skills and abilities as you can, no matter what's going on or what level of employment you've achieved or accomplished or done, and whether you're currently in it or not. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And absolutely. I'm a man of analogy, so I'm gonna kick this into a crazy high gear by using this analogy. But basically, I think that working for 40 years is like doing hard drugs for 40 years. I've never done hard drugs like methamphetamine or injecting heroin, but imagine just doing that for 40 years, right?
Uh-huh.
And because you don't, it's like you don't necessarily love doing it, but you know you need it, right? It's one of those love-hate relationships that's kind of similar to a drug addiction, in my opinion. I've never had a true like drug addiction, but I imagine it's some sort of battle between, good and bad, like the angel and devil, that kind of stuff, right? So it's really this. It's like a drug addiction, in my opinion. It's like you wake up every morning, it's all you can think of. You go to bed at night, that's all you can think of, and everything in between, it's all you can think of, right? And it's like that for a lot of people, and it's also like that for drug addicts who just do hard drugs all day. They wake up thinking about it, they go to sleep thinking about it, and every time in between, they're thinking about it, right? So after 40 years, and if you told like a heroin addict after 40 years of using heroin to all of a sudden go cold turkey, they need rehabilitation. You need
Right.
there's no organization out there that says, "Oh, you retired. It's rehabilitation time." Like no one says that. They're like, "Hey, you're on your own. This is what you wanted, right? Like this is
Right.
the glory days for you. Like, right?
Yeah.
You should be enjoying this." And that's where it's crazy because no one can do that. I think if I were to work die hard, like just die hard work like 65 and like never really go on vacations and save up that 2 million in 401k or whatever it becomes in 30 years, right? It's like I don't think that that's going to make me any happier than when I was working, which is why a lot of people try to go back to work. It's like, well, isn't this the one thing you kept saying for 40 years that you wanted to get the hell out of, and now you're going back, right? So yeah,
Right.
retirement is a hoax. It's absolutely a hoax. It's a corporate thing, and it's. Man, yes. I mean, if I really want to get into it, it's just
Yeah.
the in terms of like 401k, right? Like the
Yeah.
government absolutely makes money off of 401k because I realized that like 70 to 80% of people with 401k take out more than 50% of their 401k prematurely. It's just ridiculous. Like at some point in their savings, they take out half or more of their 401k for like buying a house or whatever it is, right? And
Right.
so that's all taxed. The government, it loves that stuff. It's like 30,
Right.
40% tax on that, right? And so that's like the whole, I guess, deferred taxation stuff. And then there's the employer matching contribution part. So the employer also looks good. And then America looks good as a corporate driven nation or whatever it is, right? And then on top of that, there's reduced Social Security burden on the entire nation because if they if they can convince everyone to like save up for retirement through 401k, then like the government basically has less pressure on like social security benefits in the future, right? It's like, well, I mean, everyone's already invested, right?
Right.
So it's just like a lot less action required now and in the future for the government in order for them to collect on taxes. And that's really all it is, right? Like, sure, if you save, but, and so basically they know majority of people can't save everything and not take anything out before they're
Right.
65. So it's just this chess,
It's a
like
trick.
it's
Yeah.
the worst. Yeah, it's the worst checkmate on the game, like in
Because you
political
have to
chess.
do it, right?
Right.
As soon as the
Yeah,
argument
right.
is, well, matching contributions, 4%,
Right.
5%, 9%, whatever it is,
Right.
3%,
Right.
some percent that's matching, it's like, well, it's free money, so you have to do it, right? So
Right.
you have to contribute at least the max that your employer contributes, or else you're missing
Exactly.
out on free money. And then once you're
Exactly.
vested, you get the free money or whatever, and you're like, oh, wow, I'm making out with a very good deal here. It's a very, very favorable situation. And then, like you're saying, the majority apparently do early withdrawals, which incur the 20% penalty or whatever it is in addition to the taxation on the money that's taken out. And then additionally, we all think we've got it made in our retirement because we're all living for this corporate model of hoping for the retirement to come, and then it comes. And the
Right.
idea behind what we're saying with retirement being a hoax is just that. What we wanted all along was to do what we believed in doing the whole time, and because we weren't doing that, we get all entitled, and so the whole corruption loops get internalized, and it's like these fractal layers where inside of the large corruption, we all have to, if we're interacting with the corruption without breaking with it, we have to internalize and create our own little corruption loops of entitlement and basically laziness in ourselves. Unfortunately, in some component or matter, it inevitably forms because we end up feeling entitled to that retirement when unfortunately, at the end of the day, the dark truth about life and nature is that nobody owes you anything, and so hopefully someone's going to take care of you when you're old. You know, you hope you have those bonds and those relationships, and supposedly nowadays the money to deal with things when you get older, but we don't have a very solvent federal government. We don't have a very efficient federal government or solvent, perhaps, Social Security department. You know, it's very much being used by the current generation of retirees, as we all know, and it's not being saved up on our behalf as the millennials or the Gen Xers or the Gen Zers or Alpha or whoever else hasn't retired yet. It's being used up on the current generation, so we're not going to get the Social Security benefits that we're paying in right now, right?
Right.
It just may or may not exist at some point if we get to retirement age and retire. So there's something where I'm knowing that I feel entitled to something because I'm being told I'm entitled to it. And so
Right.
we have to be prepared at the same time that, unfortunately, according to the law of nature, which is the law of violence, the law of the jungle, and the law of nobody owes you anything, the government can always take that away at any given point, whatever it takes, whether
Right.
it's exercising emergency-related powers or just saying, oh, whoops, we lost it because some other emergencies came into the picture, which they always do. In fact, there's an incentive even to create emergencies in order to get us to withhold some of our judgment on however much can be taken from us that we already thought was promised to us. So there's that kind of strange environment we're getting ourselves into where we actually feel like we're entitled to more than we ever could be guaranteed to the entitlement of. So we feel like the government is like our daddy or whatever. It owes us stuff, like in this sugar daddy type mentality, I guess, for some people. And at the end of the day, it doesn't care about us at all because it is soulless, right? As are the
Well,
corporations and the structures that are intertwined with it.
it wants us to feel entitled because that's what keeps us locked into the system. And another thing, I guess, that goes along with that, and the fact that retirement is a hoax, is that seniority is also a hoax. It's
Right.
they get this entitlement that, oh, senior discounts, like I get free coffee at McDonald's. Oh, woohoo, you saved $1, right? It's like, what this? It's almost like the system laughing at you. It's like, oh, you're old now, or here's a free coffee from McDonald's. Like, it's not even like, oh, like we'll buy a house for you, or like we'll invest in like assets for you because you've given for 45 years to the nation, and you know, we owe you something back. It's not even that. It's like this literal like slap in the face and a snicker as they're walking off kind of thing. Like, that's how it feels, right? The seniority stuff, like senior discount, like nothing like biologically, nothing critically shifts between, like, you know, 55, 60, 65, 70 for most people, right? It's like you can easily just continue thinking whatever it is you want to think, and then there's nothing that's like biologically preventing you or like restricting you at any given point, unless you're like getting Alzheimer's or something like that, right? So
Right.
the fact that people are just setting this 65 number in their heads, it's you know, it's really damaging. It's really
Right.
you know, it might be, call it conditioning or whatever, but the fact that most people believe in it, they don't even realize how hard it's going to hit them when they are 65. Like, you know, the one example I have is a guy that retired last year, and he was 65. He was always looking forward to it so hard. And he's like, oh, man, I'm going to get an RV. I'm going to, like, go fishing. I'm going to go to Tahoe. I'm going to do all this, all that. Trust me, I'll have things to do. Because I was having this conversation with him. And I'm like, you know, like, the biggest problem for retirees is that they don't have anything to do anymore. They're stuck in the grind, you know, 8 to 5. They're wondering how they can keep their mind, their hands busy. And you're going to be wondering the same thing, too, because you're a technician or whatever. I'm talking to Rick. And he's like, oh, don't worry, man. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to go buy a cheaper house. And then I'm going to, like, do whatever the hell it is I want until I die. And I'm like, that sounds
Right.
great. That's probably what they all do. And then I find out, like, it's been, like, a year now. He hasn't sold a house. He's desperately trying to come back to the same office that he burned every single bridge with. Like, he actively burned, like, big time burning bridges, right? And now he's crawling back. And then it's like, okay, so you didn't do any of the things that you said you were gonna do, basically.
Uh-huh.
And like, how miserable is that to like go back to the place where you 100% thought you were gonna ditch forever, and you even burned all the bridges thinking you absolutely were gonna leave forever for good, just to come crawling back. And that's actually true for a lot of people, right? And it's sad. It's just really sad. I don't know why I'm laughing.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
is a dark time, basically, if you really diagnose the situation because of the whole
right,
soul-crushing aspect of everything. But
right,
interestingly, like you're saying with those senior discounts, it's all about pennies on the dollar. It's all giving you a tiny bit of extra
right,
what they think you're leveling up for yourself in terms of leverage financially in order to make sure to keep you in line and take way more on the back end, because 10% discounts on these items that could have 100% or 80% margins, things that you're not really taking any significant profit away from the business of, while them claiming to be all moralistic about things because they're being nice to old people. The pretension of being nice to elderly people comes with this significant cost in moral integrity, I guess, in terms of the fakeness of it, in the sense that, well, the 65-year Social Security age was designed to make sure that very few people would actually survive for very long into that age, because initially, when it came into the picture, I believe 65 was approximately the life expectancy in the United States in the 1930s or the early periods when that came into play. And so it's not that 65 is this automatic off switch or anything. It's kind of arbitrary. It's not totally arbitrary because it was around the life expectancy. But the strange thing about life expectancy is that most of the lack of it being 80 or higher and instead being 60 something had to do with early childhood fatalities, early childhood disease, and rooting out and mitigating the effects of early childhood disease and making it to the age of 10 or higher is what has actually increased much of our life expectancy these days. But as far as elderly people go, elderly people still do have a life expectancy, like if they reach the age of 65, you are still likely to reach the age of 78, 80, once you get to 10 years old, and then obviously once you get to 65, your life expectancy is much higher than 65 at that point, because you made it through those ages where maybe you weren't living any healthier than anyone in any prior civilization up to that point, but maybe you just happened to survive, right? There are recorded historical people who made it into their late 80s or 90s or maybe hundreds, and these people lived hundreds of years ago, right? So it is kind of an arbitrary cutoff for the time period in which it came about. But yeah,
I mean, if you don't look at pre-puberty ages, the bell curve distribution for the last few hundred years has been roughly the same in terms of ages, right? So yeah. But the average obviously gets brought down because of those, adolescent deaths or whatever. So, which we don't have much of nowadays.
Pre-adolescent,
Oh, pre-adult, pre-adolescent.
Yeah, generally being 10 years old or 20 years old is a very safe time in life. Although, unfortunately, the highest risk of death is by suicide and car accidents at that age. So, strangely enough...
Oh, you mean now? Okay.
Well, the highest risk of death for teenagers and very young people, but I would say older than 10 years old, is those events. Suicide and car accidents.
Crazy, dude. You got oh man, little kids offing themselves, that's a crazy thought. But yeah.
Yeah. But it is of a higher magnitude, I think, than prior eras. I don't know all the stats on that, but I do believe that suicidality is at a higher rate today among people of adolescent and older than it used to be, because I do think that we are becoming less happy, less fulfilled with our lives, and it kind of has to do with what we are talking about this whole discussion here, the alienation of labor and the soul-crushing nature of work, and the idea of worshiping money, as we kind of don't say we do, but we kind of tend to slowly over time and surely, as we demand more income for the same level of exertion, or just always getting a raise or something and trying to compete for more of that raise than the other people getting their reviews or getting their raise at the rate of, just makes us all crush kind of our own souls internally over time, and that can't be good for the soul. So it kind of leads to many people acting out at some point in ways that maybe in prior civilizations you wouldn't quite see as often. So it kind of ties into the whole picture of that alienated labor still, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, man. I was like trying to segue that into a different topic, and I totally forgot how I was going to do that.
Yeah,
but
we were talking about life expectancy and the workplace and retirement, pennies on the dollar, and these discounts.
Right. No, I mean, it is all a hoax, right? So basically is, retirement, seniority, all those things, it's like this. I mean, in terms of retirement and seniority, it's like this absolute point in like people's lives. Whereas, most things I think are just relative to, how you feel in each moment and all those things. And basically, I'm a firm believer that instead of, working hard, saving every penny till 65, that you should be spending about 20% of your earnings on leisurely things that you want right now, right? It's like you want to go to, you want to hike Mount Everest now. Do it. Don't wait until you're 65, right? Even though it costs $600,000 or whatever it is for one of the tour guides to lead you up there. Do it now, right? I mean, just think about, the things you want to do, how you want to do them, and how healthy you need to be in order to do them. Don't assume that you're healthy now and you will be at 65. That's what corporate America wants you to assume. Right? It's like, hey, this good feeling you have for yourself, you're going to always feel it. So just save for it, right? It's like, no, don't save for it, because tomorrow is never promised, right? Do what you want to do today. Don't go all out with it. Spend the 20%. Most people probably don't. The people who spend on themselves in that fashion either spend way more than 20% or spend way less than it. And I'm saying keep the balance at 20%. It's worked out for me. It's like you end up going on at least 1 or 2 vacations a year. You can buy drones, audio equipment, whatever it is, relatively decent ride. Just don't be afraid to spend until it's too late. And corporate America makes a lot of money off that, because if you die with your 401 savings, guess who that goes to, right? It's like, even if you will it to a family member, it gets taxed, man.
Right. So, of course, some people have to sell their properties that were in their own parents or their own, whoever they're inheriting from. They have to end up selling it because of the taxes, and they don't actually end up getting it transferred to them. It just goes to the government.
Oh, dude, yeah, that's true. That's a double bad. No, I mean, that's just how bad the system has got us, dude. It's like...
And speaking of Mount Everest, for some reason, I mean, another commentary on that mountain is the fact that so many more people are climbing it now, that it's this tourist destination thing, that it puts a heavy literal physical burden on the Sherpas that makes them kind of want to quit their job. So apparently they're kind of dropping like flies because there's too much of a burden on them, and too many, out of shape people who want to seem really fit or take the journey of a lifetime, which it obviously is, aren't fully prepared for it, but they think of it maybe in this kind of, not explicitly corporatized, but apparently, if it's this tourist destination type corporatized entity that they're thinking of from a distance, rather than having a genuine interest in lifelong mountaineering, leads to many less than fit people ending up putting heavy burdens on the Sherpas to carry their luggage and all, and carry their equipment, and make it so much easier on them that they really don't even have the qualifications to be there in the first place. But because money talks, there are all these people climbing the mountain by like the thousands, and it's becoming a bit of a burden, like too much. in many cases, and I'm not saying nobody should climb it. It's like many people who have the willpower, the mountaineering experience, expertise, and the fitness level, the tact, and the guts, basically, not only to say, like, I'm tough, I have the guts to do it, I'm doing it for myself, but the guts to actually put not only themselves on the line, but work as a team with these other people who are also all risking their lives as well, to be able to confidently say that you would step in to try and save someone else if they're slipping and freezing or running out of oxygen or whatever it's going to take to carry someone else off a mountain where they're going to die if you leave them in place. Like, how many people really have that amount of grit, determination, and expertise in doing that? I would say a small percentage of the originals, obviously, and an exceedingly small percentage of people who go there and see it as like this tourist destination. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's still probably a thing now, I'm guessing, but the last time I updated myself with real information and news information about this stuff is probably 4 or 5 years ago, when these Sherpas from Nepal, Tibet, or whatever were complaining about exactly what you're saying. It's like, hey, we're good. Like, we know we won't die if we carry our own bodies up that mountain and back down. It's like we go up there and collect some. Like, dude, I don't know. Do some research or whatever. Like, if it wasn't for tourists, like they go up once every couple weeks or a month, and now they go up every few days or something. And then, like you said, they have to not only worry about their own lives, but they have to worry about all the lives of all these stupid elites who never worked out in their life and just decided they'll pay $500,000 to post on social media that they got to the top of the highest point on earth or whatever, right? I get it. It's like that's like an elitist mentality, but it's like the worst combination of elitism and actual physical prowess. Like, you need to be absolutely fit beyond what most people think is fit in order to even think about traversing that mountain, especially to the top, right? And
you could be very fit on your own level of your own altitude and still have almost no chance of doing it. It's almost far and away beyond anything that even very fit people who live at low altitudes could probably comprehend the difficulty of, right?
So, dude, 4 or 5 years ago, I was watching this. I got some documentary, and the Sherpas were already leaving. Right, they're already like, "Hey, my life's not worth whatever this is." Like, yeah, they bumped up our bonuses, our pays, but it's not enough for me to risk my life. Right? They basically didn't think they were risking their lives doing it themselves, but now that they have to do it with other people, they absolutely think they're risking their lives. So even 4 or 5 years ago, I knew these Sherpas were leaving. And I know for a fact that these nations Tibet, Nepal, they absolutely rely on this tourism for GDP. So they're going to try to keep it as hard as they can. What are they going to do? They're going to find people who look like Sherpas, who look fit, who just believably can be Sherpas to any elitist traveling from around the world, and then just bring them up there. Hey, you want an extra buck? It's like, oh man, I've never done that before. I never climbed up the mountain. Like, this is the Sherpa. I've never climbed up the mountain before. Hey, we're gonna pay you $200K, right? Yeah. Will you do it now? Okay, fine. I'll do it, and I'll make it look believable, right? And so that's what it's gonna come down to. It's really dark. It's really sad, but that's what it's gonna come down to.
Right. It's gonna come down to people selling out, which effectively is selling out their souls, which effectively is selling out their lives and the lives of the people that they're supposedly responsible for, the lives of and the health and safety of, but they won't be qualified. So, yeah, I guess Mount Everest climbing has probably had its heyday. It's probably peaked. Pun not intended. No pun intended. Absolutely not intended. But it has probably peaked, and it is now probably been forecasted to decline now, because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the failure rate of climbing Mount Everest will continue to slightly go down over time, because qualified people will continue to learn more about how to do it. But as far as what we're describing and the goings on of the recent few years, it would seem like it would point the other direction. You would get more people less qualified to do it being asked to do it because they're selling out to do it, and that would heavily correlate with the failure rate going back up again, to going back up above 20-25%, where it used to be 1 out of 4 people didn't make it when they went. So yeah.
So yeah, 4 or 5 years ago, I did read this Reddit post about it because I was looking it up on Reddit, which I guess people are more or less more honest. I don't know, apparently, right? And they're already saying how in Nepal and Tibet that they're censoring the number of deaths, right? It's like the number of deaths that they're admitting is already crazy for everyone, but it's just crazy enough for people to stay intrigued and not want to not go. So if they truly reported the absolute ratio of deaths, like if it's 1 to 3 or something, which according to Reddit, it was 1 to 3. It's like out of 3 rich people who go there who have never done anything close to that in their lives, and probably don't even get off their couches, right? For 1 in 3 people, they do not leave the mountain, right? And it's like, okay, if that is the truth, like, and if people around the world knew that, they wouldn't go there. So they have to lie about this number.
Right. There's no incentive for there to even be a transparency in that regard, because there's no worldwide mountaineering, like fatality-based corporate agency or like a intergovernmental panel on mountaineering fatality, quality control, like measures of statistics going up the mountain and being like, okay, how many people are dying around here? I'm going to climb every mountain. I'm going to climb the other mountains, but only like at a distance, not really like for fun, but just to measure how many people are dying around me. And
they're just up there with a notepad and a pencil. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
That is not something that would be transparently opened up to across all mountains everywhere. Everyone just wants to present their own mountain as being relatively statistically safe somehow. Right. In order to keep the tourism going.
Exactly. And they have to balance this number because they know that everyone knows that it's the most dangerous mountain to climb and that people die on it. So they can't say that like no one dies. So they have to say some people did die in order for tourism to continue, which is insane. Because the kind of people who go to that are the kind of people who want that thrill, right? Oh, people have died. But if they knew 1 out of 3 people have died, I think that would limit a lot of people from going. That would prevent even like, I don't know, like people, athletic tourists from going, basically. Right. Yeah. But anyway, that is a dark reality there as well. Since this is StatGDP, I mean that is what maintains the GDP of a couple of nations over there. So.
Right, and what is this? Apparently, the deaths rate is only said to be about 1 to 2% currently, with the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's reportedly 1 to 2%. I thought it was reportedly about 5%, but I'm wrong about that, according to this overview. And
no, it's more than 5%.
It would probably be higher than that.
Yeah. It's actually closer to 15, 20, or 30. Like, it's just like anywhere between 15 and 30 is probably a more accurate estimation.
Right, but 1 to 2% sounds believably safe to tourists to say, well, 99% I got this, 98% I got this, so I'm not going to be the one. So it's all about the margins and tricking people with numbers, because for some reason, apparently, even though we all know numbers are absolute, they are logically validly exactly themselves, and they're the only absolutely provable things in reality is this self-contained set of logic and absolute proof by deduction, numbers, mathematical systems, syntax, and topology structures or whatever. It's like, oh, numbers, that always settles it. Numbers are real, but it always depends on who's reporting however many of the numbers and how accurate and honest they're being with them, obviously. And so in that sense, unfortunately, numbers are fake at the end of the day, just like you're saying with this whole retirement age. You can feel fit or out of shape at any age, and it just depends on how well you keep up with yourself and your diet, fitness, and your mental sharpness and all. acuity, but yeah, it's probably higher than that. I wouldn't know from going there or anything, but it seems like it would be much higher. They would at least really want it to seem like it's much lower, obviously. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's no international mountaineering forum or whatever that checks on these things, right? Like across all the mountain peaks throughout the world.
Yeah.
So everyone's free to to fudge whatever numbers they want in order to get, you know, it's more visitors, right? And I'm surprised at the numbers at 1 to 2%. I'm pretty certain 4 to 5 years ago, the publicly stated number was much, much higher than that. And there's no way that with the limited Sherpas and people like the actual Sherpas, like the original Sherpas leaving, that the number has dropped.
Right. That would, on a fundamental analysis level, not possibly be the case. If number of Sherpas has dropped, then the demand continues to go up because it's GDP. So they're always going to want to sell out and get the advantage of this tourist destination accounted for more of their economy. So that's going to increase the number of unqualified Sherpas that they somehow hire who don't have as much experience as the originals, so that will lower the quality of the service they're providing and therefore the safety, and that will just inherently increase the fatality rate for doing one of the most dangerous things that most people ever do, obviously. So that would seem to be the case. I mean, it's strange, but it feels like it has to be the case that Mount Everest has had its heyday for humans. Maybe it will always be climbable by somebody, but the more of us who think in our arrogance that, oh, we are the pinnacle of humanity, so we can do anything absolutely, even if we're not prepared for it, the more of us get that hubris and arrogance and this mindset of, well, money solves everything. Sell out to money and it'll solve all problems. Just throw more money at it and it'll become inherently a higher quality of service. So just make the trip more expensive, and those must be some really good life-saving Sherpas, guaranteed, right? But if you don't do anything for yourself to account for the ability to save yourself in dire circumstances, then it's the hubris that's going to get people. And basically,
for sure,
there's a critical mass that's reached where we will be on the decline in some sense at some point. And I don't know, that's definitely kind of an analogy to other things in life, though, besides Mount Everest, right, is that a lot of things, we want to keep pumping these numbers higher, but once we believe in the numbers too much, it'll only all be about putting everything else into this numerical category where the numbers, whatever they're measuring, and therefore the dollar amount takes over everything else. So basically selling out our souls for money in order to keep the money train going for those of us who have bought into it enough that we decided we're going to make it all about increasing this,
Right.
The depth of reality being infinite means that even though we thought, going back to childhood, that, math is one of these subjects, things are numerically divisible, we can count the number of things that exist, and it's all about wanting more, getting more, and maximizing the amount of output we have, or income. Therefore, it's all about the numbers. At the same time, in some level, numbers are fake. And unfortunately, we can't really say they're entirely fake because they are tied to something that we have to keep track of. But the divisibility of it means that the level of divisions we create is arbitrary. In other words, the number of things that exist is arbitrary. They are effectively infinite by definition. So it's all whichever level of the fractal structure you depend on counting on. So it's hard to sell out to any particular level of the fractal division of nature, but you might as well have hopes that you can grasp the relevancy of each individual level, which again is however many of them there are, which is also arbitrary. But just know that there are different levels of interaction and scales of things, and you need to have a worldview that is consistent on every scale of interaction that you can think of, or else it doesn't really fit together, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's like you're saying, I mean, there's infinite layers of fractals in every individual reference frame in terms of, our minds and individual minds, just tries to latch on to what it believes is the right fractal layer to latch onto. But what we've been conditioned to do as a society is try to figure out what exact fractal is everyone else around me latched onto. And the inability to realize that no one's on the same fractal and that everyone should organically try to stay on their own. But that's where the clash, the soul crushing, even outside of work happens. It's like most people are not trying to stay on their wavelength because they believe that it's better to try to get in on quote unquote everyone else's wavelength, which also is a hoax. It doesn't exist. Right?
You're saying everyone else's wavelength does not exist?
Well, everyone's wavelength does exist. It's an individual wavelength that can't be tapped into by any other reference frame.
Oh, right, because it is its own independent signal, and it is composed of an unknown, hidden black box of weighted kind of variations of modal frequencies that are vibing, and at which you can't fully categorize every single frequency and intensity along that spectrum.
And we're in a society where most reference frames are thinking that not only are there a finite number of reference frames, but they can get in on all the particular reference frames around them, which is like a hoax within a hoax within a hoax.
Right. It's like, what are they really prioritizing? And you can have verbal or written communications of, these are the barometers, these are our indicators, this is what we need to perform at. These are the keys of the scenario of the situation that we have to maximize these variables of. And then maybe if you follow that, you're following what is allegedly the mindset or procedure that is recommended by someone else. And then the wave function that you believe was collapsing into this Dirac delta function, infinitely high priority with a width of 0, but a overall integral value of 1, area under the curve, maybe feels like you need to do that in that situation, but in any other situation, if it's different, it's like, oh, so I guess that wasn't what was the actual priority. They were wanting something else. So I didn't fully get in on their signal. And what you're saying is it's impossible to ever fully get in on their signal because maybe they don't fully know what it is themselves. But if you ask certain leading questions, they kind of question their own signal and start to maybe feel uncomfortable about figuring out what priority structure or level of the distribution of function of priorities of different hierarchical levels of distinction that they want to actually focus on. So it's all this big cluster of like incongruence and a possible division that is kind of a can of worms or that kind of Pandora's box that we can open up that leads us possibly astray, but to me, it's actually completely clarifying. It's just whether we all want to come together and actually go through the tough procedure of that clarification, which means total openness. And it's like, what are our real priorities? Like, how much do we care about each individual thing? It's really hard to do that. And it's kind of interesting that in job interviews, you're kind of asked these kinds of questions where it's like, how much would you care about this or following the procedure? And you can get asked like, a question of what would you do if your higher up asked you to do something that was against procedure, It's like that exact question. It's like, well, it depends on the situation. You really can't know for sure how you're going to react because it depends on just how far away it's swaying or straying away from the procedures that are supposedly what you're supposed to be doing, and how much does that compromise the mission statement of the company and the quality of the product and the safety or the procedures safety-wise and our productivity and everything down the line of what it's going to cost to betray this principle. And at the end of the day, isn't everything just vibing with whoever you're vibing with? So you could say, well, I'll go along with anything my manager says. But if you're fully going to vibe only with that manager, then you're always going to run into that same exact issue that was just described earlier, which is you're going to you're going to collapse your wave function to this infinitely high Dirac delta function of, I'm going to follow just this guy or this gal, I'm going to do what they say, I'm going to be super obedient. But ironically, the company and the recruiters and HR and person interviewing doesn't actually want you to say you're completely obedient to that one person, because that manager or that higher up, whoever it is, they could also not be fully obedient to what the rest of the company is considered to have the mission statement of, that the recruiter or the person doing the hiring is attempting to get in on, or seeing if you're going to get in on it, right? So it's always some kind of weird middle ground of like, well, I don't know how obedient that particular manager is being to the company, but apparently if I'm supposed to be obedient to them, then it's some function of, or ratio of, however obedient they are to the company. I guess I should also obey to the company, and that's like the kind of layered spectral analysis type response that I would think of, that makes it highly ambiguous, but also at the same time very difficult to explain in a way that vibes with the getting along or going along to getting along likability in any kind of interview type situation. You just come across as totally far and away beyond what people would usually verbalize, I guess, if you come up with a strange response like that. You know what I mean?
That's true, and pretty bad segue here, but
because you have to admit the whole structure is fake going into it.
Right, the structure is fake, and this is also, again, this is a bad segue, but in terms of all that, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. Right. The DEI principles.
Like, that was a bad segue on my part, I'm sorry, but basically it's like adds another layer to the fakeness, right? It adds another thing you have to consider in the workplace in order to stay quote unquote real within the workplace point of view. And DEI is another, I guess, hoax. And it's not a hoax. I mean, it's a PR stunt that and I mean, that's all it was, right? It was just it was a PR stunt, and it didn't go well because it costed companies more money than it earned them. Right.
So that is why they turned their backs on it. As soon as it really, the push comes to shove, it really is still all about the money. So part of DEI was making it seem like your corporation was moralistic and didn't care about the money, but care about this balance of nature, that we somehow have already figured out what the right balance of natural tendencies and characteristics are, racially, religious wise, and the whole gender notion of the pronouns and having inclusivity on the gender balance, and all these notions of which levels of victimhood needs to be represented, basically, in order to not be considered a victim anymore. It makes us like more shallower, basically, because it gets us thinking along the lines of, well, how can I do something unless someone else who looks just like me already did it? I need to be inspired by the people who look and seem just like me for some reason, which is kind of a victimhood mentality that's prolonging itself, because why wouldn't you just be the one who is the change that you want to see in the world? Be the first, and you'll be better than anyone who's a follower because you inspired others, right? It's like anyone can do anything, but the idea that someone else has to look like you in order for you to be inspired to do that is a shallowness that maybe is correct because we're all racially biased individuals or something. Maybe, I'm considerably, racist against other animals because I value humans more. Maybe that makes me racist because the whole Charles Darwin book on the origin of species ends with another subtitle of preservation of the favored races in the struggle for survival. Like, Charles Darwin was talking about races of, species and organisms. So I guess I'm racist against all the other species unless I happen to like other species more than humans, which I don't know if I do, but I think a lot of people do like their dogs more than other humans and their pets and things. And a lot of people do root for the large predator in situations where a large predator is going after a human, where the large predator is in its environment already, and then the human ends up getting into a scuffle, ending up having to shoot it or something, and ending up with what they would consider a wrongful death on the part of a guy or a gal going into the territory of another and almost dying, but having to inflict self-preservation based lethal force in order to survive. A lot of people, they get mad at the human and they take the side of the animal. They wish the human died because they went into the lion's territory and had to shoot it. So it's like, well, there are too many humans, 8 billion humans, and however many million or thousand lions. So they take the side of the lions. Maybe it's scarcity and wanting to preserve nature, but that's another topic. But anyway, coming back to what we were talking about, right? We do have this fake culture of, well, we didn't earn it, but we deserve it still. DEI, right? Did not earn it, to go along with that meme.
Didn't even invest. Okay.
Right.
But,
and so unfortunately you see pronouns in people's bios and their emails, and it makes you question things more so than otherwise, because they're pushing this notion where you already knew they were female or something, but they have she, her in the email signature, and then that actually makes you not feel clarified towards, but confused a little bit more, because that makes you wonder, well, now that they have to say they're female, are they really female? And it's just this weird, ironic confusion that I think doesn't really seem that necessary. You know what I mean?
well, to add to that irony, this is one of the notes I took down for this. Their motto is, do unto others as you'd have done unto you.
Right.
So it's like, really, and so the thing. Okay, but I guess aside from that, when I first heard about DEI back in the day, I forget how many years ago it was, but like, as somebody who identifies as 100% Chinese and looks 100% Chinese, I was thinking, really, are all these racists around me all of a sudden gonna like calm down and like treat me fairly as like on a level that they never wanted to admit before? Like, I don't think so, man. They're probably just gonna say that just because corporate wants them to, and because they can keep their job by saying that.
Right. Yeah, it just creates one more loop of corruption and fakeness that is going to have to forever embed itself within the workplaces that employ these strategies of coming across as good on a PR level. And whichever so-called people against DI there are, they're going to have to just hide it, suck up to it, and then, it just creates more and more loops of fake moralism that spreads throughout the soul-crushing nature of corporate Western world, basically, and the world, basically.
You're right, and just to add to that thought, like, it's also kind of like it's like a mechanism for larger companies to, like, limit competition, right? Because it's like it raises the bar for entry for other organizations, because then they have to like absolutely implement this DEI stuff, so they have to pay for HR to do all these like, I don't know, like meetings and whatnot for people, and these modules, online modules or whatever, they have to pay for that, right? So this is a higher bar of entry to new like startup companies, and that's what keeps the older companies still in business, right? It's still this old corporate mindset, right? And just to add to that, now we have like AI, right? So all these companies, like, in order to be a really bona fide company, it doesn't even matter if you're like food service or whatever, you need like one AI assistant kind of person, right? So just to add to like, the bar of entry thing, but like, going back to the original bar of entry of DEI, I mean, that you can see that. I mean, I could see that as another way to limit newcomers in the industry.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's to keep old corporate America the same, right? And why it's that idea of like, why redesign the wheel? And we're all in that. We're in this world where we want to redesign the wheel individually, but the things controlling us and conditioning us have already decided that they're not going to redesign the wheel.
Right. They will give us the opportunities to feel like we have the chance and the wherewithal and the vision, the power to empower ourselves and completely revolutionize the system as if we do have a chance. They want to give us every opportunity to feel like we do have that chance, while at the same time trying to, in this hypnotic fashion, give us absolutely no chance as much as possible. So
Right. You just be in this like state of delusion forever. Like as long as they can perpetuate the state of delusion, this is sounding really dark, but whatever. Like as long as they can perpetuate the state of delusion, we will always feel happy or convince ourselves to feel happy, whatever that means, doing what we think it is we need to do for the system.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah. Anyway. Sorry, that was a bad segue on my part into DEI, but I realized that was one of the big topics.
Yeah, it's all good. And that
Yeah.
has to do with what are we talking about? The whole Doge and how that's now the Department of Governmental Efficiency, which I was hoping would not sound ironic. I hope it would not be an ironic company of the government body where it gets too big and then bloated and it kind of defeats itself. And it seems like it's not doing that, because what's in the news is the hysteria over these few kids and the small little Department of Government Efficiency with these 22-year-olds and all going through and using more efficient technology to kind of survey the rest of the government and kind of root cause where the inefficiencies lie. And to me, it's the 80-20 principle, right? You do get 20% out of your 80%. You get 20% of your output out of 80% of the people who aren't really achieving too much. They're kind of trying to keep the job but not do too much. And then you have your 80% productivity coming from the minority, the 20% or so. So in that sense, most bodies only really require half, if not 30%. Maybe you could push it and say 20%. And get that 80% out of them, perhaps. But there's always this kind of conveyor belt of people reaching in and maybe doing something productive for a little while, but then reaching back out and then being able to claim achievements on an annual type basis, or however long it takes to expire their achievements and feel like they're not contributing to the company as much anymore according to their higher-ups or whatever. And as long as they do something a little bit of the time, they'll feel like, well, they're in those 80% of people who sometimes do stuff, but mostly don't exert themselves as much as possible. So, in a way, you could shave a lot of organizations down by 50, if not 70% or so, and get very similar output. It would be very similar. And seeing that the government in the United States has the largest budget out of any entity in world history and has very high revenue as well, you would think it's strange that it would not also apply to that body, and it overwhelmingly most definitely does, right? So if we can shave off little by little, billions of dollars at a time, or even hundreds of millions, if that's what it takes, we can balance a budget when we have the highest revenue of all time. You know, if any budget can be balanced, it would be the one with the highest ever revenue going into it. That would seemingly be the easiest possible balanceable budget of any kind ever. And yet it's the least balanced budget of all time. So why is this irony here? I guess it's because it has the ability to request or sell bonds to the Federal Reserve so that it can print money on its behalf. So it has this endless money supply. And we're just kind of banking on that continuing for the moment.
Right. We're relying on, we're relying on a figure to balance this budget here. Some sort of new world default celebrity.
Right, we have a new world default celebrity concept here. There's the celebrity that sells out and has this corporate background where maybe initially they were doing it for the fun, they were doing it for the enjoyment of being an entertainer or whatever they were doing, whether it was production of some technological device or series of connected, internet technology or information technological devices, whatever it is, those connections, or maybe a singer or whatever. Whoever's doing it for long enough and ends up selling out to the corporations eventually always peddles and internalizes the corporate line and becomes the establishment, right? So it's that Batman quote, right? Dark Knight, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And the question is, have we totally reset what the mainstream almost definition of a celebrity is to where you have the old school celebrities where they show up and you're like, oh, that's that fake plastic, maybe not plastic surgery necessarily, but just the kind of corporatized looking plastic personality where you know everything that they're about to say, and they're going to pretend that it's edgy every single time they say anything, but you know every single time they say anything it's not edgy at all because you already know everything they're going to say. They're going to say whatever Pfizer or whoever wants them to already have said because they have so many sponsorships in so many different directions that it seems like they have no actual personality anymore. They just bank on the fact that their existence peddles some kind of response to people who recognize them enough to feel like they can still buy their merch or feel like they can still agree with their perspective as if they are some kind of enlightened figure, whereas maybe they've already sold out completely and they have no valid kind of genuine perspectives on anything that they're ever going to tell anyone because they're already just playing a part. And so maybe we've reset already. Maybe the new type of celebrity is the one who says whatever is on his mind and doesn't worry about being canceled, regardless of money or not, however much they gain or lose by it. And maybe it's whoever is considered most cancelable by the establishment. Maybe the new kind of celebrity means getting canceled on a large level and still moving platforms, getting away with still having a voice in some sense because at least theoretically we have free speech, at least protected by the government, supposedly, in government contexts, which can only be so controllable by so much, but theoretically we still have the spirit of free speech as a concept.
I think, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said, and I mean, I guess the way I look at the term celebrity is that it is a subcategory under the umbrella term cultist, and it's like, no, politician can be a cultist, a celebrity can be. It's you have a following, and you have people who don't follow you, and that's really all it takes to be a cultist, right? And I guess what I'm getting at is like also like kind of like what you're saying. It's like you need to voice your opinion organically and not care about what the whiplash is or backlash or whatever, and that kind of is a cultist, right? It's like you just state exactly what you believe in, and whoever follows you follows you, and whoever doesn't follow you, then they can go and die or whatever. And you rely on the fact that whoever follows you is going to be enough to carry out your plans or your aspirations for the betterment of everyone else, right? Of everyone, including you. So is being I guess what am I really saying? It's the default celebrity is a cultist, right? I don't know if it's really truly a celebrity in the sense of what I would define as a celebrity, which is like you kind of idolize them and idolize their lives and follow everything they do from a day-to-day point of view. Like that's kind of how I see it. But but cultists have always been around, right? Like for as long as society has existed, for as long as language has existed, I'm sure that someone spoke their mind and people gathered around them and listened, and certain other people dispersed right as soon as they saw their face, and that's an organic interaction. Call it cultism, call it whatever you want, but that is the most organic sort of interaction we can have as humans, right? It's like not pandering to any one side, just speaking your mind and seeing what organically follows you, right? So
right,
that is the new world celebrity, in my opinion. At least that's what I hope we're striving forward to. It's like a celebrity, quote unquote, that doesn't have this echo chamber of thinking about what their followers are expecting out of them. So it's like this super fake on fake thing, right? Like it's not. It shouldn't be that, right? It should be a more organic thing. But anyway, yeah, I'm rambling now. Go ahead.
No, it's exactly pretty much that, because you need someone who is willing to state what everyone else is already kind of thinking, because once you state it, it's going to resoundingly resonate with a lot of people, and
Right.
a lot of things that a lot of people are thinking currently wouldn't be verbalized necessarily, and so the modern day kind of new age type of celebrity would be kind of a rare figure among celebrities, because they would be the ones who would be most frowned upon in the public square of the current established corporate type interest celebrities, and not only governing bodies who want to hide and embellish the corruption that they're going through with, but also news agencies, whoever is basically considered the worst person just for speaking their mind in public is probably a case of a new age celebrity. So, someone like, since the 2015 Republican primaries, Trump basically would qualify, right? He would be a guy who is considered one of the worst people ever in history by a lot of people, because of the news and because of statements he's made that sound like they go heavily against the establishment and totally like root out or are aimed at claiming that the whole system is corrupt, and he says he knows it because he's bought out a bunch of politicians. He's been there, he's been on the other side, he knows exactly what it's like, but none of them want to admit it, right? None of them want to admit, oh yeah, I took Trump's money. They want to be like, no, Trump's a bad guy, but don't bring that up though, yeah, but you contributed to our campaigns, like, on both sides, but don't bring that up. And then he admits that, like, well, what do they do when you contribute to them? Well, they do what I want, You kind of own them at that point, because if you're their source of revenue, the billionaire class can obviously contribute more to their campaigns than, like, they can, and then not even with respect to funding, but whatever illicit type activity is going on, the billionaires are going to be able to donate more in just any kind of funds that they funnel their way than their own salary is going to. So as soon as it's about the money, it's just going to increase the level of corruption, just like we're always talking about on this podcast. But the fact remains that it's whoever doesn't care about their own money and is willing to state and say the things that destroys, large parts of their own net worth, and for them to not care about it is something that goes against the grain enough to make you feel that maybe it's genuine. And doing something that loses you money doesn't absolutely prove for an absolute fact that it is genuine, but it at least shows that it's possibly genuine, right? At least
Right.
you have the possible deniability of the fact that it doesn't have to be for the money if you're doing it to lose money. And of course, you may still state within this loop that someone could just be stupid. They could always be just as corrupt as anyone else, but they're just doing the exact opposite of what they should be doing. So they are that corrupt, but they're also stupid, so they don't know how to get away with continuing to be corrupt. So therefore, they're speaking their mind, they're getting canceled, they're losing money, but it's because they're not only corrupt, but they're also dumb. So you could say that Trump is a character who succumbs to this characterization of himself from outsiders who hate him, that, maybe he is not only evil and corrupt, but he's also dumb and doesn't know how to get away with being corrupt even. But it would seem that if you can rise to the very top when you're being opposed by both sides of the political establishment and all of the former families of these people, from the Bushes to the Clintons to the Cheneys to the Obamas to the Bidens and to the Harrises and all of the world, that if you can get away with totally blowing them out of the water and still defeating them by margins that were stated to be impossible, for a Republican to win a popular vote was supposedly not even in the question, regardless of polling in the 2024 election, having it tied, many people thought that even if it was within the margin of error, it was somehow just guaranteed, like, and divinely ordained, that he could not win, or he could not at least win the popular vote. He could only win a rigged election, where some state that the Electoral College is rigged, because that is the game that is played in modern American politics. It is not a popular vote. It is a contest to win the majority of electors in states, and everyone knows it going in, so that's how they run their campaigns, right? But there's this thought that, well, he can't win in a genuine way. He can only win in a corrupt way because he's stupid, he's evil, he doesn't know what he's doing, and so I know in this divinely ordained perspective that he will not win. And a lot of people got their minds blown when it was determined that almost exactly half of the public sided with him, a very near 50-50, almost majority, but higher than expected. And apparently he knew what a lot of people were already thinking, and a lot of people agreed with it when it was stated from other people that it was, impossible that it could happen.
Right.
So it kind of reeks of the situation where the curtain is being pulled out and, the expose is happening. So maybe we can root out a lot of corruption, and others would say otherwise. Naysayers would say it's just going to increase the amount of corruption. But I think reducing the size of the federal government makes the conflict of interest go down, kind of. So I think everybody can point out and say, and will snap to a quick decision of, oh, that person needs to be fired. You see videos of whatever happening in some incident in workplace incompetency, and you see people commenting and just saying things like, oh, that person needs to be fired, they need to be fired, they need to be fired immediately, right? We need more competent people working these jobs. Everyone likes to snap to these decisions of they need to be fired, we need competency. But when it comes to rooting out corruption somehow in agencies that they think are good or that they depend on, somehow there's no corruption in those. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Yeah. I guess it kind of, for me, it always goes back to this sort of cultist sort of mentality for me. Like, it's not like it's like everything is a cult, but it's not just hunky dory. Not everything's all just bright sunshine, right? You're
Right.
Mostly it's gonna be half with you and half against you, whatever it is, right? I mean, in terms of a leader, politically, or just a celebrity, whatever you want to call it. Political, like what is it, like a celebrity politician is like what Arnold Schwarzenegger and Donald Trump are,
Jesse
right?
Ventura
So
is another example.
Okay, right. I didn't even think about that, actually. Yeah, you're right. So I mean, it's a whole category for that, but it all just falls under, again, the umbrella of cultist. You have followings, and you have people who don't follow you, right? And I guess there's a reality to that most people aren't willing to admit. And it kind of wraps back to the other topics from this podcast, where everyone wants to believe they're living in a perfect world while knowing, deep down that they're not.
Right.
So,
and
yeah.
historically, well, at first, obviously the first, and still going back to politics on this, but the first president of the United States was obviously not a former United States politician, since the United States did not exist when he was the general defending against the Brits. But the first president was a former commander of the army, right, of the newly founded United States. And most of the politicians, maybe back in the day, commanded some kind of authority because their people wanted to know that they had something at stake, that they were willing to lose themselves, either on the battlefield or their lives or their wealth or whatever. And that was significant, and part of commanding the authority was you had some stake in the game. You had something on the line. And so that is a level of cultism, I guess, that is more powerful, but at the same time, more real than what we have mostly in the modern era of politics, where there's still cultism because congressmen are very, very good. Once they're elected, they're obviously really, really good at getting reelected. It's like 95% of the time they just get reelected, right? So they just are congressmen for life, basically. Once they're in for like 50 years, even, potentially, right? And does that mean they're perfect at their jobs? No, it's that they've perfectly gained this cultist factor of like, oh yeah, that's Mitch McConnell, he's always going to be there as the senator or whatever, and or whoever it is, Nancy Pelosi, oh, she's been there forever, so it's just keep getting her back every 2 years. Like, everyone just banks on the idea that they have this cult following mentality of the fact that they went into it to become a career politician, and over time it just cements the fact in the public eye in their congressional district that they are going to be the one representing the district from then on, because they are the familiar figure with the name recognition and the history of doing it, and the history of claiming that they're doing it for the common good because they are a public servant that is ordained with that status. And that's kind of like the fake way of the cultist type celebrity politician, where they didn't become a celebrity and then become a politician. They became a politician in order to become that celebrity cultist career politician, and that was just its own internal loop, right?
Right.
Whereas
it is. Yeah.
we don't have too many, Donald Trump-like figures. Maybe you could say only one, but I mean, there are very few who make it to this platform where they are well known enough that maybe they are therefore just using their cult following status to then jettison that into politics. And we're still talking about kind of cultism, but in a way, I don't have any positive or negative connotation with the word cult. Unfortunately, and it does have a negative connotation, but cult is just the inoculation of a culture, right? And culture is necessary for nationality, nationhood. It's one of the 5 characteristics that I call of a nation is a culture. But culture starts with small groups eventually branching out into large groups, and that's all a culture is. It's a very large cult, right?
Right. No, exactly. I agree 100%. Yeah, that's how I look at it too. I don't view it positively or negatively. It's pretty much neutral, right? It's however you want to look at it, because apparently you get 2 sides that are roughly 50-50, so it might as well just balance out as neutral. And I mean, but yeah. It's the inability of the masses, again, to accept that it's somewhere in the middle, right? It's like, oh, no, it's got to be one way or the other. It's got to be left or right. It's got to be red or blue. And so, yeah, that's what ends up, dividing us, being soul-crushing, blah, 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 all that. So...
Well, because with politicians, somehow they're able to work with each other and go to dinners and, meet and stuff on the side and hold these fundraisers, and they get together and they're somehow able to cordially be, maybe not real friends, but they're able to somehow go along to get along in this whole fake system that they're also a part of, to where they can publicly show the exact opposite. It's kind of weird because in most workplaces, you're expected to kind of publicly, or at least within workplace, pretend to be friendly with everybody, right? You're supposed to go along to get along, which apparently they do, but they do it behind the scenes, right? But up front and in public, they only shame each other, right? They only state that the other side is going to end us, and this side is the good side. We're fighting the good fight, but they on the other side, they are fascists. They are a cult that is bad, and they are going to end us. They are a threat to democracy. They are insurrectionists. They are breaking down our traditions, which are good, while at the same time we need to change our traditions, which are bad. So it's this kind of double-edged sword of like, well, they are the devil or whatever, and we are the good guys, so follow us. But we still have to transfer power to them if we lose to them in a democratically held election, because our sacred democracy relies on it. There's some inconsistency in that, and I would rather see consistency than inconsistency, I guess. So I would prefer honest disagreement, if that is what it is, an honest disagreement, to fake going along to get along, whatever you want to call it, acquiescence or whatever it is. Right. And I'd rather see that. So if we were consistent with our politics, we'd be going at in a hot civil war right now, warm with weaponry, I guess, if we went with the level of rhetoric that it is currently escalating to. But instead, we have this kind of cold civil war going on right now, effectively, where basically some people state that this last election was the end of democracy, because it didn't go the way they wanted, so therefore it is the end. That what was not expected for them happened, so therefore, we're under an insurrectionist, we're under a fascist, we're under a dictatorship now, and Elon Musk is in charge, and he was never voted for, although he was stated to be the head of the Department of Governmental Efficiency before the election was even held, that it was relatively transparently stated that Trump was going to appoint him as to this new little cabinet position to do a lot of the work. But it's all kind of interesting. But anyway, yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of, opposing politicians possibly hitting up the same bar afterward and breaking bread and going to Thailand and banging the same prostitutes and all that. Like,
Yeah.
like it's a system that's I feel like it's a system of being the solution to the problem that you are actively propagating yourself. It's almost like it's how I see like the medical industry, right? It's like, well, you have depression. Well, here's these antidepressant pills that are possibly going to make you feel even more depressed, or possibly like going to make you like physically decline, and possibly going to make you want to come back for other medications that we're also going to give you. It's like it's like, well, you're creating symptoms, and then you're coming up with solutions for the symptoms that you're creating, right? And so it's this perpetual loop that's controlled completely by you, and you have to fool all the victims, I suppose, within that system, that they want it, and that they rely on it, and that they believe in, on every level, right? And that's, I guess, it's getting really dark, I guess, but kind of like an overarching concept, in terms of this podcast. It's just this perpetuated loop of symptoms and solutions for those symptoms, right? But it's all created by the same entity. And we're all stuck in the loop, basically.
Yeah, so the worse a problem that they can sell politically, the easier they can come up with the fact or a narrative surrounding the idea that they came up with a solution. So everything's really bad because of the other side, but it's really good and it balances it out because of our side. So therefore, both sides kind of equilibrate over time into this kind of competitive state that it fits this binary pattern, right? Where both sides agree that the same system that they're using is advantaging themselves career-wise as individuals, and then it equilibrates into this idea that eventually, I guess maybe there is no equilibrium once people are feeling worse and worse. It kind of just means that they have to play it like however bad people are feeling is because of the other side, and however good people are feeling is because of us. So therefore, if people feel worse over time, it's going to be reflected psychologically in kind of in a kind of almost psychic way in the politicians, because if our politicians seem like they're selling doom and gloom more and more, it's kind of a function of our own doom and gloom mentally as a society as well, because we want to hear that. If things are bad in people's personal lives, if people aren't as happy as they used to be, they're going to want to hear it spoken and openly and honestly, and they're going to want to hear it transparently. So somebody is going to be telling them how bad things are, and they're going to believe it. But it's just a matter of the fact that there's a corrupt incentive of wanting to sell people the idea that only the rest of the people are the corruption. I'm not the corruption. So it just feeds back into itself, and it kind of does have to be a reflection of how good or bad the society actually feels. So in other words, we kind of get the politicians we deserve, I guess.
Right.
Because we are feeding into it. We do elect them. It's our democracy, etc. So we get the politicians we deserve, and we just have to pinpoint whoever's being most transparent, and it's a really hard thing to do, because there's a level of bias where the believability of a statement is totally a function of what we already believe, and so it's almost impossible to snap out of one's own biased perspective, because nobody wants to admit they're biased. We just want to use the term bias to describe other sources we disagree with, rather than our own, which supposedly are unbiased, which just means our own perspective. That's all that really means. It's like saying, I am at the center of the universe, so I am unbiased, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you identify your reference frame, therefore you're unbiased.
Relative to
Yeah.
yourself, yeah.
Relative to yourself only, yeah. Like if it's like the whole money thing where if you get everyone in the same room with all the money in the world, all that money all of a sudden can mean nothing as long as everyone agrees that it means nothing, right? In terms of politics, it's like if you got all the people who thought they were politicians or whatever, identify as politicians in the same room, and then just convince them all that politics don't mean anything. Like we're all just humans who organically want to think the way we want to think, regardless of whatever corporation, organization, or government it is we're working for. Then all of it would just dissipate. All these layers of obviously it's not going to happen. This is like one of those like peace to mankind, like is hippie kind of thoughts, right? But like you get all the
Right.
politicians in the same room, it's possible to dissipate everything that we identify as politics and then just become more organic in terms of a human society, right? But maybe that's not what ultimately works out.
No.
Apparently organic society wants some sort of politics in the end,
Well,
right?
right. You're describing the anarchic dream, kind of the state of
Right.
going back to, okay, everything is reset to zero, and we are just
Right.
in nature. We're trying to survive. How are we going to survive? How are we going to decide authority
Right.
and what we need to do? And it's kind of like you take out the head and it grows back. So you
It
take
does.
out the head, and we wonder, like, where are our authority figures? What should we be doing, really? And who should belong where and stuff? Historically, you do have the clergy, you do have a religious rule and a monarchy and the nobility and the military. So you do have these factions of dominance and relations that people look up to or have to or forced to submit to, with these kind of intertwined militaristic and religious and monarchical kind of divine right to rule forces that always end up seemingly coming back to dominance with whoever decides to take authority and conquer the rest of the society by force, and then eventually intertwining into these governmental bodies once again. So the anarchy is kind of this state of nature we all kind of want to be in, because it just means that we are the masters of our own destinies as individuals, and nobody's going to be in charge or power over us. And so that it sounds like a very inviting, idea to not have anyone else have authority over you. Technically, we are in that society. If you want to see it that way, nobody has absolute authority over you unless physically they force you or, eliminate you through violence if they force you to do something. But you also have the ability to inflict physical force or restraint on others as well. So it's all a matter of everyone is empowered to be their own person. Your boss is not in charge of you, unless they, like I just said, physically force you to do stuff, which is not the kind of society that we believe in these days, that we're not supposed to physically force within individual relations of polite society. But at the end of the day, that is exactly why everyone lives approximately where they live, rather than over some border boundaries that conquest happened, wars happened, and the borders were drawn, and we have these military distinctions and governmental agencies overseeing them, and it always still kind of forms back into this state of feeling like we're being oppressed by some hierarchical power that we kind of are, but we are kind of not at the same time, because its penetration level is not 100%. It's like it's got somewhat of a coefficient of penetration of, totalitarian rule or ownership over our everyday lives, and we hope that it's trending towards the negative, bearing the negative velocity rather than positive, but it just kind of tends to increase over time until some revolution happens, I guess, once the powers that be reach too high of a threshold and go above our level of comfort with it. But they're always, since everyone wants power, everyone will try to maximize and reach that threshold and get as much power over us as possible until we resist. So it's all a matter of how long until that resistance, how long until putting all the politicians into that room and telling them it's fake, or putting all the money in that room with them, seeing them fight to the death or whatever, until they reset each other by eliminating each other and going back to square one again, to feel like whoever else, the little guy or whoever else opposes those politicians, like decides how to reform the society again, I guess. So I guess I'm just saying history repeats itself.
Right. Agreed. Absolutely. I mean, from a micro level or something, people might say, "Oh, we never had a president like this, so history's not repeating itself." But you zoom out far enough, on a scale of like 100 years or something, yeah, there's always been some sort of political figure or cultist or whatever you want to call it in a neutral way that changed the course of history as everyone knew it at the time, right? So you zoom out far enough, history always repeats itself. Like, I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I agree.
Someone who changed the nature of our politics or changed the nature of how people just think about whether they're going to verbalize anything. So change the nature of social relationships across society with a level of influence that is unparalleled by the century. And, those kinds of figures do come about once per 100 or 200 years or so. So that does happen. And it also goes back, as you know, thousands of years to the point where there are religious texts where it says in them, anyone who wants to live a life in the name of this figure, Jesus Christ or whoever, will be persecuted. And it's like, if you want to live the good life, it's going to be rough, it's going to be tough, you're going to be persecuted for it, and there's going to be a lot of resistance. So that principle of trying to do what you think is the right thing, even in the face of modern or contemporary corruption, is an idea that goes back millennia, right?
Right.
But apparently some revolutionary figure has got to do it once in a while, or at least that is the natural tendency. So yeah, we could be going through another one of those times, as we were kind of saying we always are. So yeah, we are. But
yeah. We always saying we are, but you and I are kind of certain that on an absolute level we actually are.
Yeah, so let's say we wrap it up right about there, as we're coming up on almost an hour mark, probably. Yeah. So any final thoughts or anything else you'd like to add to that? Where's my couch?
No, I'm good. I think that was a very a wild discussion. We got pretty in depth there, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. Hopefully, the listeners will find some sense of enlightenment.
Yes, let's continue to enlighten others as we enlighten ourselves in this continued discussion on whatever is going on in the world today on hopefully a lot of different levels. And so thanks so much for joining us, people. This has been the StatGDP podcast. This is Fool Me Twice, and I'm here with
Where's My Couch?
Where's My Couch? And we will see you guys next time.
Peace out.
Signing out.